Hello, ghouls and ghoulettes. My name is Parallax Abstraction, and welcome to the first episode of Retro Flashback Halloween. Yes, indeed. So, I've had a little bit of an absence from episodes in the last while, and I thought what better way to bring the show back than with a full week of episodes dedicated to some of our favorite retro, horror, scary themed titles, I guess you want to call it. I've been looking forward to doing this for a little while, and I think this is going to be pretty cool because while nothing from back in the day could necessarily be considered horror, there was some pretty neat stuff done with the concept back then, and seeing what people had to work with was quite impressive. So, we're going to start this off with an oldie but a goodie for me. This is a title that I played in the arcade when it was new at the local neighborhood arcade that I went to in Ottawa's West End called the Fire Button, rest in peace. And this was a really interesting title at the time. This is called Splatterhouse, and it was originally an arcade game, but it also had a few well-known home versions, including, interestingly enough, on the TurboGrafx 16, which is pretty cool. And, well, I'm going to show you right now why it was rather controversial in its day. Pretty easy to tell, to be honest. Now, this gore may look pretty downright comical by today's standards. You wouldn't be wrong for thinking that, but back in the late 80s when this game came out, this was hella edgy. Decapitations, gratuitous amounts of blood and gore, gross torture victims in the background. This was a very controversial title. Namco took a lot of stick for the portrayal of things in this game. And it's interesting, though, because that's not the only real notable thing, only notable trait it has. It's actually a halfway decent beat-em-up platformer in its own right. I love this 2x4. Oh, it's so good. It's actually a fairly notable title in its own right because while it is kind of simple in the end, it's also got some really interesting mechanical twists to it in terms of especially these boss fights. The combat in the game actually can be approached a number of different ways, and the boss fights in particular are really cool because they're all very unique, and they all have surprises and sort of little neat differences to them that make them really stand out and really show that somebody put a lot of care and attention into this title. And I'm screwing it up here. One of the things to note about this is that it actually, this is the arcade version that we're looking at here, which is the highest production value, quote, purest version of the game, I guess if you want to call it that. But this did actually have a number of ports to home systems, though not the ones you might think. Interestingly enough, largely because of this game's blood and gore, it had a hard time getting on a lot of the more popular older systems. So this came out, the most notable home version of this, at least for me, actually came out on the TurboGrafx 16. It also came out on PC and on the FM Towns, and, well, you can easily be forgiven for not knowing what the hell the FM Towns is. It's something that only came out in Japan and that nobody bought. And that was the blood and gore was a good part of the reason why, because this game, as I said, was extremely edgy for the time, and companies like Nintendo in particular had very picky standards when it came to family friendliness. Not to say there were not Nintendo games, or games on the NES, I should say, that had a lot of violence in them, but gore, not so much. You may remember the controversy about the fact that when Mortal Kombat came to home systems, the Super Nintendo version had no gore in it. And that was actually at Nintendo's demand. They basically said, we're not going to license this thing if it's too graphic because we don't feel that's appropriate. And that was one of the reasons we didn't see this on here. But this is what I like about this game. Like, it's simple. It's definitely simple, but it can get challenging pretty quick. And the boss fights are really what set this guy apart from the crowd. You saw that first boss fight with all those really kind of screwed up worm thingies. Well, you're going to see another one here that's very, very different and very, very cool. And I just really like how the levels change up quite a bit. we had the sort of standard level where you're just progressing through a normal dry environment, but now we're in the water, and there's different kinds of enemies down here. I mean, really, they're just the same one-shot melee fodder enemies, but they look very different, and they have a lot of different detail to them, both visually and audibly. And now we've got the unkillable environmental enemies that you want to dodge. So this guy here, like that. And in true beat-em-up fashion, there are items in the environments that you can pick up, other weapons, the 2x4s, the knives, etc., etc. I do kind of wish there was either more variety or that they degraded a little bit more, because it's kind of a win button when you pick up a 2x4, as you've seen here. So this is a different boss fight, and as you can see, it's quite a bit different here. Hard to jump in the room because the room is shaking. You got to dodge a whole bunch of stuff falling down, and then you were like, what the hell? Furniture's coming after me. And when you played this for the first time in the arcade, you were kind of blown away by this. Like, this was very, very unique. The fact that you didn't know what was coming at you. You know, now there's knives coming at you, and you have to hit the knives to stop them hitting you. Not necessarily something you would be your first thought, but this is what the game expected of you. It always kept you on your toes and threw different things at you. Now you got this photo. That guy's a bugger. I really hated having to deal with him. And that's what was cool. There was so much variety in this, and to do the level of variety that this game had really required a lot of effort at the time, both in terms of design and art and programming proficiency and things like that. That's what I thought was cool about this. So many beat-em-ups are just really rehashes of the same enemies over and over again, with bosses just being bigger, tougher versions of the grunts for the most part. And there's certainly a lot of that in here, but these boss encounters were all very different and all required very different mechanical and playstyle variants in order to take them out correctly. And I thought that was really neat and different at the time. Other games kind of did this. Castlevania did this to a certain degree as well, but not to this level of variety. Castlevania stuff was definitely more variations on a theme, I would say, than this one was. I used to be able to do this in my sleep. It's been quite a while since I played this game, clearly. But this is what was cool about it. I mean, this game did have a story, if you wanted to call it that. I mean, not really. There actually is a fairly well-documented story you can see on its Wikipedia page, and about this guy and his girlfriend that get caught out in the woods in a storm and need to take refuge in this haunted house, and how she gets either kidnapped or killed or something like that, and he dons this mask, which totally doesn't make him into Jason Voorhees honest. Yeah, it's pretty blatant that this game was trying to play off of the Jason Voorhees popularity at the time, but this is not Jason Voorhees, and this game has nothing to do with that horror franchise whatsoever. It's just, this is what this is how Namco managed to cannibalize something that was popular. I believe your character's name, what is it? I think it's Rick something. Alright, I got him. And this was the shocker. You had to make sure you weren't standing in the center of the room. Rick Taylor, that's this character's name, yes. Not Jason Voorhees at all. Alright. And so it goes. You'll progress through a few different environmental stages like this. They're all different to a certain degree. Ah, yes. Here comes the bigger win button. Except, of course, this being a gun, this actually does have limited ammunition. But oh, what a thing it does. And this is what's neat. So you see we've got this dog enemy here that has his own attack pattern, quite a bit different from what you've encountered to this point. Oh, and then there's these things, which are just, these are disturbing. Want to make sure you dodge these things. And this is what I really liked about this game, is it's just the variety is what I think was really different from a lot of other platformers. The gore was impressive, especially back when I was a kid. Also the fact that now we've got a branching path back in the water area here. Now this is basically the same water area we experienced before, only harder. But again, you thought you were dead there? No, not necessarily. The game always has new and different ways in which it can surprise you. And that's what I really liked about it. The gore was impressive, and certainly I think what garnered most of the initial popularity that this game had, but it was also kind of a good game in its own way. I mean, I love beat 'em ups. I'm on record of saying that multiple times, but at the same time, beat 'em ups, you could be forgiven for saying that beat 'em ups kind of were all the same for the most part. And this one really tried to mix the formula up a little bit, and it succeeds in some ways and doesn't succeed as much in others, but I really like that they tried to bring something different to the table, and they did it with a horror theme as well, which is kind of different on its own right. So this game kind of became a franchise. There were sequels to it. I've actually, funny enough, never played any of them. I know none of them were ever as popular as this one was, and Namco did attempt to make a god-awful modern take on this game that they released in 2010 for the 360 and the PS3. I mean, it was gory and shared the name, but that was basically all it was. It was not good. Oh, bugger. I almost had him. This guy is actually really, really tough from a pattern perspective. There we go. But it was really neat at the time, and so the one thing to note if you're going to try to find the means to play this, the TurboGrafx 16 version of this actually is available on the Wii Virtual Console, which is really cool, but while it actually is a pretty good version of the game, especially considering that the TurboGrafx was a very limited platform compared to the power of the arcade board that ran this, at the same time, it has some limitations. It's kind of funny, even though NEC did allow this game to come out on the TurboGrafx, the Namco was required to put a parental advisory on the package that actually said, what was it that it said? It said, let's see if I can do some damage to this fool. It said, what was it? Oh yeah, the horrifying theme of this game may be inappropriate for young children, ... and cowards. So they actually required to do that, and partially because of technical limitations, and partially because, apparently, of demands of NEC, the gore is turned down somewhat. There is not nearly as much detail in the graphics, especially in the backgrounds. A lot of the more horrifying sound effects are missing, or, again, toned down quite a bit. It still plays really well. It is also a fair bit easier. The enemy variety is not as frequent early on in the missions, so it is actually... This game, to be honest with you, is not particularly hard, but it's also not super, super easy. I would say the TurboGrafx version would be the equivalent of if you took a game like this arcade one and turned the difficulty down from normal to easy, something along those lines. One level easier, so definitely not quite the challenge that this one is. But it was this was from an era when home versions of arcade games were generally not as technically profound or proficient as the arcade editions. This was still an era where if you wanted the real high-end experience, you went to the arcade, so it's not really a surprise. But it's a fairly faithful representation, and they did a really good job with it considering the much lower amount of horsepower that they had to work with. I think that is impressive in its own right. Let's see if I can get this guy before we sign off here. Nice thing is you always have a way to avoid using your gun if you want to. With 8 bullets, maybe we can take this guy out. But I think this game is still really fun. I think it holds up not bad. I mean, it's pretty simplistic by the standards of most modern platformers and the like, but for the time it was pretty cool, and it is historically notable because of its controversial elements and the fact that it was one of the games at the time that really challenged public perception of violence and gore in video games. That's kind of funny. Like how he can jump multiple times in midair. Yeah, this game really pushed the envelope, and I think I always think when it comes to art, pushing the envelope is important. This did it. Mortal Kombat did it, and it's very important for that reason. But it's also a pretty good game in its own way, and I think there's definitely some fun to be had here. The easiest way to get it is on the Wii Virtual Console, but you are getting the slightly streamlined TurboGrafx version, but you still get the core experience with that. So I would say that's still worth checking out if you want. My name's Parallax Abstraction. Thank you guys all very much for watching, and well, I'll see you tomorrow.